And I'm excited to learn from everybody here. I think Jason covered that super well, that this is a really neat collaborative space to be in, and honored to be a Vermonter in the MOFGA space. I've been to a couple in-person farmer to farmers and really enjoyed what you all do there. The sharing's really incredible. And I'm going to try to frame the conversation before Carl and Spencer dive into the particular practices. I work for the University of Vermont Extension with vegetable and berry growers. My kind of task, I'm grant funded, so I work primarily on soil health practices. My background is as a commercial grower, and I still have a farm with my family. So I'd say I'm coming at this from more of a practical perspective and catching up on the science of it all as I go along, and really just learning from farmers, a lot of the great folks in this room here. Before I get into it, I just want to acknowledge that I'm a guest on my land. I live on the shores of Lake Champlain in Vermont, and we are just grateful to live here, but wanted to acknowledge that this is Abenaki territory we're on. Before I innovative cover cropping methods, just wanted to touch on kind of the benefits, which everyone knows and is familiar with. So I just wanted to reiterate it to give us some context for the conversation. Why Spencer and Carl are taking things in the direction they are is really to maximize these benefits. So we've got all these goals, which you all are familiar with. You can pop things into the chat if you have other ideas beyond what I've listed here, but really these big picture things, right? You're using cover crops to build biomass and organic matter. Weed suppression is a huge one on organic farms, improving the soil structure, microbial activity. Erosion's a big one in Vermont. People are compelled to cover crop because of our water quality laws here. So there's an increase in cover cropping for that reason, as well as the nutrient management. Soil moisture management, of course, nitrogen with legumes is a big one. And finally, I've been more and more intrigued by the habitat we can provide and enhance through cover cropping. Now, I think as most of the people in the room are probably vegetable or diversified growers, and I think we get kind of locked into some norms because we have a short season and we have a lot of limitations. So I'm going to kind of share what I see on most farms. And again, feel free to populate the chat with other ways that you see cover cropping practices normalized. But winter rye is across the board the most heavily used cover crop. And then sometimes we add hairy vetch into the mix if we can get it in a little earlier. And then oats and peas have a really great role. And buckwheat's really the most common summer cover I see. So I just wanted to lay out what I see on most of the farms I go to and what a lot of you are probably familiar with doing and probably do very well, and not to discount these cover crops, but I think we're excited to go beyond, get a little more excited tonight since it is a Monday night at 6:30, high in energy. So some of the gaps that I think these practices leave us with, I don't see a lot of summer covers on farms. I don't see a lot of no-till, especially on organic farms where there's a huge kind of barrier to engaging that practice. Interseeding is growing in popularity, but still challenging in living mulches. And I think it's largely because we don't have big land bases on our farms, especially some of the more valuable lands where we're growing really valuable crops. It's hard to pull land out of production and value it for a cover crop. And I think that's a really good decision to make, but that's kind of what I see happening is it's hard to make that space for cover crops. Equipment's a big barrier. Seed availability, I think, especially the last couple of years, I see more and more difficulty with that, especially if you haven't planned ahead and you're like in the zone of trying to get your cover crops, and it's hard to run out and figure out where to get them. Residue management, again, back to kind of equipment, and then the information. I've been digging around for this stuff for I've been at my job for, I guess, 5 or 6 years now, and I'm really just learning from farmers. So there's, I think, a lack of actual technical, and Jason, there's some great extension information out there, but I think there's a lot that we can improve in terms of information. This is one of the great resources, if you all are probably familiar with this, but it's Managing Cover Crops Profitably. I have a link at the end of my talk. It's a SARE publication, and I just like how it lays out the roles of all the cover crops and breaks it down in this way where you can see like each of the mechanisms that cover crop fulfills. So again, when we're thinking about innovative cover crops, I think this is one of the best resources out there, and it's free online. And then I saw this in one of Jason's talks 2 summers ago, and I think this is like one of the best framings I've had to work with for cover cropping, kind of like a decision tree. And I think this, if you plug in your own head, like what you have for equipment and what your needs are in terms of getting into the land, this is a good way to think about it. So no equipment, small scale, and you just want to have some cover crop and then be able to get on the ground in the spring, probably a low residue winter killed cover crop is your best bet, which is great. I talk to a lot of master gardeners, and that's really what I recommend for them, because they don't want to be messing around with 2-foot tall rye in the spring. If you've got like a flail mower and a disc and all this awesome equipment, then you could go the other direction. High biomass, winter hardy. And then anywhere in the between, I think the pieces fall into place as you're crop planning, and then you can kind of use these framing. And this is where the innovation can come into place. If you have a gap, you can select from these kind of these quadrants really nicely. So winter rye, again, is the most accessible, cheap seed, easy to get on, grows like crazy. You feel good about yourself. You've got green growing all winter. It's awesome. And you can do a lot with winter rye. You can seed into it. I love the system where some farmers I work with frost seed red clover into rye in the spring. And if you're not familiar with frost seeding, it's like one of the most satisfying ways to get clover to establish. You just go out there in March when there's some freezing and thawing happen, sprinkle on some red clover. I've done it just by hand, you know, don't even need to spin it necessarily. And it works its way in, and you can get a really beautiful stand of red clover. So in this farm, they remove the winter rye when it comes into maturity for straw, like right before it sets seed. And then what comes in is this photo on the right is a beautiful stand of red clover. So really sweet system. They're reducing their tillage. They're getting a legume. And it's a great way to utilize winter rye and kind of double up on that field. Again, I also like, if you have access to a combine, I used to use one in the intervale. We combine off the seed and then have straw for mulching. So rye does have a lot of roles in innovation. And oats and peas, I don't want to skip over it because I think they are awesome. And I do think underutilized here. They have, you know, they can be spring or fall planted. They grow like crazy. They put on a ton of biomass. They suppress weeds. They can be a little tricky in terms of timing, especially that fall planting in terms of weed competition. They can get a little, if you don't have good rain, sometimes I see some messy fields, but they're great. And then you can come into this in the spring, like a nice winter killed field that's pretty easy to manage for getting spring crops into. And hairy vetch, once again, it is fairly common, but I think it's a tricky one to manage. And I'd like to hear some innovations about how people are managing hairy vetch, because we get more nitrogen from hairy vetch than pretty much any other legume, especially one that can be done in an annual cropping cycle. And you can get up to 120 pounds of N from it. It grows like crazy. It's got these beautiful blooms. It's a little unwieldy. So this photo actually was, I was doing a cover crop trial, and I just didn't have access on that farm to a flail mower. And I just tried to go in and rototill it, which I knew was a bad idea, but it was all I had, and it stunk. So again, having the right equipment and understanding how it all fits together is important before you jump in and spend the next 3 hours underneath a rototiller trying to untangle vetch. So start writing down ideas for what you guys can share. So Spencer, I'm kind of stealing your material here, but this is something I really admired with Spencer, who's going to speak later. Elmer Farm, they're doing a lot with radishes, which I had always been told like is a no-no on vegetable farms. I think there's still a lot of concerns and considerations in terms of disease management, in particular clubroot or cabbage maggot. But if it can fit into your rotation, it's an awesome cover crop for vegetable farms, and it's really alleliopathic. And if you feel like you have like a light soil where nutrients might be leaching, they really pull up. They go really deep, and they can really pull up nitrates. And if you have it with a nurse crop like oats or peas, the daikon's just crazy good at pulling it up, and like the oats will suck up that nitrate. So really awesome. It can be super. I know that sounds funny, but I have heard complaints if you're near a neighboring farm or a neighboring neighborhood, normal people might not like it, but I've been really impressed, and maybe Spencer can talk a little bit more about that, but he comes right in with oats and peas and seeds, no-till onto that. It's a nice clean field. I've also been experimenting with this year, this high glucosinolate mustard. It's really promoted as a biofumigant. So it can naturally, it's basically a mustard gas that's been bred for it, and suppress diseases and weeds in the soil. The trick is to chop it up really finely and then seal it into the soil quickly. So within 20 minutes of the flail mowing, you want to come back with a second piece of equipment. But what I learned in playing around with it this year is that it's just incredible because it grows quickly. It's like a 45-day cover crop. The picture here was a field. There's just, I think it's like my favorite thing that happened this year was this older farmer down in the southwestern corner of Vermont who's been spraying crops regularly for 40 years with fungicides and has just a cucurbit sweet corn rotation. We told him there was a workshop about this. I was down there in a farm visit, and he's kind of like, that's, it's like in the other corner of the state. He called me the next day and he's like, hey, I want to try that mustard. I said, okay. And I went down and I seeded 5 acres, just spinning it on with my little like sling spreader. And it grew like this. And I couldn't believe, I thought it wasn't going to do anything. He called me back in like 45 days on the mark and was like, Becky, I'm scared it's going to go to seed. So I like raced down there and I hopped on his tractor and like, there we go. And I haven't been able to, the timing probably wasn't great for the biofumigation, but here's a guy with this awesome cover crop and biomass, and the bees were going nuts on it. So it made me excited about this just as a quick growing summer cover crop. And again, you have the concerns about mustard in rotation with it, with other brassicas, but I got excited about it. Some other fun ones are sun hemp, which I see more often in mixes than straight, but it's a tropical legume that fixes a ton of nitrogen. The seed can be really hard to find, but it's also really rugged. I actually haven't grown it myself, and I've heard that you really need a flail mower and probably want to mow it 2 or 3 times in the course of the season. It's gotten the name hemp because it's got that like kind of fibery, it's not actually botanically related to hemp, but has a fibery stem. But pretty awesome. It has a pretty bloom. Japanese millet, I really love too. This is Hillary Martin from Digger's Mirth, and they do a really awesome oat pea in the spring, and they follow it with Japanese millet, and they are managing their weeds very successfully with this rotation. They're mopping up the nitrogen that's left from those spring peas with the millet, and it's been they've done this for several years in a row, and I think it's a really sweet rotation. And then I was at a farm last week. I thought this was so cool. The farmer started to flail mow his millet, and he saw a ton of birds in there, and he's like, you know what? I'm going to leave the birds some food this winter. So he might have a little bit of volunteer millet in the spring, but if you're thinking about biodiversity and wildlife habitat on your farms, here's a great way to foster that. Sorghum Sudan grass, also a fun summer cover, more vigorous than millet, but has really great soil building potential. If it tillers out, if it gets mowed, the mowing's kind of a practical management, but really that soil building happens after it's been mowed 2 or 3 times. It soaks up a lot of nitrogen and is a really quick grower and likes these hot summers we've been having. I also think it's a great indicator of weak areas in a field or areas of leaching. So on several farms, it's actually helped us troubleshoot some problem areas, which is kind of I think a unseen or unspoken about benefit of growing some of these more vigorous nitrogen loving summer covers. Phacelia is a really fun one to try too if you're thinking about branching out. It's a well loved by pollinators and insects. I don't see a lot of it in Vermont. I think the seed's pretty hard to get. But this picture on the right is the farm that planted it in conjunction with daikon and I think some oats and peas in there. And you can see it wasn't like, this was in the fall, it wasn't doing great, but It's a nitrogen fixer. It's something different, adding to the soil biodiversity. It's really beautiful when it does flower. And then mixes are kind of, I know, exciting to a lot of people, and sometimes I poo them, but I actually think they're a great way to just learn what does well and to have some confidence that you're putting down something that's going to grow, and to really make sure you get a good cover on at oddball times of year. So this one is like oats and vetch, peas, clover. Sometimes it's just like sweeping up your shop floor or mixing up whatever's left and chucking it on the field and seeing what works. And I've been impressed by how some of these come out in terms like you can mow it off and then the clover establishes. So lots of fun ways to manage them without extra tillage. Sometimes, especially some of the dairy farms around here that are required to cover crop, but don't really want to handle vigorous winter rye in the spring, are doing these lighter mixes. So they'll do a winter hardy wheat or rye mixed in with oats, maybe even daikon, things that will winter kill. And I think it's an effective tact if you don't feel confident in managing an unwieldy rye. The downside is this picture on the left where this farm did it, and then they had the oats kind of, they like mush down into a mat. They'd gotten pretty big in the fall. They mush down and then they leave this window for weeds to come in the spring. So unless you're like ready to get right back in there, it can be problematic on organic farms, but something to consider. I think it's a fun way to manage for the biomass in the spring. And this is sometimes a dream scenario on farms. This farm I work with in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont that has a ton of land, they put a third of their land in this perennial grass legume system, and they'll cut half of it. They leave it there for a couple of years. They have partnerships with other farms, and it really, like, their weed control is phenomenal because they can go back in there and they're totally clean. There's no annual weed pressure. So it's a whole different management regime, but I think there's, again, it's that land pinch. If for some reason you're in an area that's kind of land rich and you have some potential partnerships, this is a really, I think, exciting way to cover crop and manage for like that long-term soil fertility. And then this is more often where we end up on the farms I work with, where I'm like, okay, you don't really have any land for summer cover. So how can we cover your soil for part of the year? And if you look at this field, more than half of that's in a cover crop, in a summer cover crop. And it's amazing. The only part that's not really, well, I mean, there's black plastic on there. So annual ryegrass has been adopted by a lot of farmers. Tony LaHoulier at Footbrook Farm in Vermont in this picture, he's been doing it forever before anyone really talked about it. And he puts it on everything. He does it on his bare ground crops, his plastic beds. And it's a different thing to manage. Like you have to mow it or weed whack it kind of on a weekly basis in the summer. So some farmers don't like it. It's a different, they say I either have to cultivate or I have to mow my ryegrass. But especially if you're on a slope field or erosion, you just want to get some cover crop in there because you're on a light soil. This is a great option. You can use a little, it looks like a lot of walking, doesn't it? But you can use a little Scott's like lawn or whatever those lawn spreaders are, or just a bucket. So Lisa McDougall at Mighty Food Farm, she just puts down her plastic and right away tosses on seed, and she gets a really good establishment. She pretty heavy layer of annual ryegrass there. And this, I think you can stop mowing it at some point in the fall, but it's pretty great. And around here, it like sometimes it overwinters, sometimes it doesn't, but it's not too much of a bear to manage. Unless
Becky, sorry.
Go ahead.
Are they raking that in or just surface broadcasting?
No, I think usually like Lisa, she'll drive over that with her transplanter so that she gets pretty good seed to soil contact. I haven't really heard of anybody doing more than that. I think it establishes fairly well on its own, but I could be wrong. Others can speak up about that here. So having breaks field with cover crops that are drive lanes, Spencer has a really sweet system with that, where you have like
Right,
8
Becky,
beds in production and then one of the sod.
You cut out for a second. Can you just go back to to start what you were saying about this slide?
Sorry about that. Is that better?
Yep.
So having these drive, harvest lanes on the farm also is a way of getting some more permanent or summer covers in there. And also, again, breaking up any soil erosion with these heavy rains we've been having. White clover too, I really like. I know it's a little harder to establish, but once you do, you can handle the traffic. This is actually a conventional farm, so they think they have a few more tools to manage it with, but they leave it in right through the fall. So this is what he's going into the fall with. He didn't really have to do any extra cover cropping and just has these little swaths of, soil that might stay bare all winter, but with that white clover, it's, a reasonably cover crop field with a nice legume. And then there are some really great innovations with no-till going on. I'm sure folks up there are doing it as well. Or I know folks up there are doing it as well. I've been working with a farm this year who they're pretty small scale. They built a little ripper, and we mounted it on the back of the tractor, and it ripped the slots and planted in brassicas. The key for them in the organic system is the solarizing or tarping after the cover crop is crimped down. On a lot of scales, having that flail mower is a really key tool, and it allows for some of the stuff I know Spencer and Carl as well are going to talk about, but some of these cut and carry systems where you can actually transport your nutrients from one field to the other and have some pretty juicy mulch put down the fields. Very refreshing too. And figuring out ways to incorporate tarps in conjunction with cover crop breakdown to reduce tillage is something people are playing around with too. This is also from Elmer Farm. Spencer could probably better tell the story of this field than I can, but yellow blossom sweet clover on the left there, you can see how big it was, and it was awesome, and just did minimal tillage to plant right into it. So that's a really awesome cover crop I've been seeing more and more of, kind of can be seeded in the fall and has a really awesome tap root, does great soil health benefits, puts on a ton of nitrogen. I played around with this zone tiller years ago, and these pieces of equipment are a little above and beyond what people can access, but this was something Extension in Vermont played with, and just some ideas about how that could work is crimping the cover crop and planting into a zone. You still need to manage those weeds, but something to have fun with. And great resources out there. That's it. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks a bunch, Becky. That was great. So I just had a couple of comments here. It's like Spencer has had issues with the annual ryegrass in the drive aisles, and getting a big rain right after seeding and having all that seed pool and move away from where you want it. So that's one argument for raking it in or just driving over it right away potentially. And looks like Ben has had success with rolling over the ryegrass. I'm not sure if that's annual ryegrass or winter rye, with a roller on the flail mower to just get that knocked down to get some soil contact on it. So cool. Annual ryegrass. Yep. All right. Any questions? Just like real specific to what Becky just was covering. And as I mentioned before, we'll have plenty of time for question and answer and discussion with Becky and others at the end of the session. All right. So, and if anybody has questions that they just want to ask directly to Becky, you can do that in the chat box as well by clicking on the to line down at the bottom there. Okay, not sure. Carl, do you want to go next? Thanks, Becky.
Happy to do it. There we go. Cool.
Looks good.
Well, here we go. So I'm coming from Goranson Farm. My name's Carl, and yeah, I'm psyched I love cover crops. It's it's one of the few things on the farm that I can define as something that I specifically do, and otherwise I'm just kind of running around. So yeah, I'm excited to talk with you guys. It's not shifting my slides. Okay, there we go. So we're farming Wabanaki territory, and I feel like it is really important to acknowledge that. And this land is really unique. We're kind of hugged on either side by the Eastern and then the Kennebec River. And so the soils here are just absolutely amazing, and we're really blessed to be able to work this land. And currently we're cultivating around 79 acres, and then about 33 acres of that is in cash crops. And we've got around 34 that's in an annual cover crop of some kind, and then we've been trying to progressively move more and more and more land into perennial cover crop. And we are growing diversified organic veg and have been since 1998. So it's funny, I'm the one person in this photo who doesn't work on the farm full time. And so it feels really weird to say that, but I couldn't do anything that I do out in the fields in terms of cover cropping without my dad, Carl Johanson, my mom, Jan Goranson, and my brother, Goran Johanson. They really hold down the fort. My mom grew up here at the farm and met my dad in the 80s, and they transitioned the farm from a conventional potato farm to diversified veggies, and then from diversified veggies to certified organic veggies. And both Goran and I have gone to school for sustainable ag. We love farming and are excited to be a part of it. So I'm going to be talking about three little things. Just wheel track seeding of matted row strawberries. And then we've been experimenting with cocktails pretty much since I graduated college a while ago now. And then I'm also going to talk about how we're managing frost seeded clover into later planted winter rye. So to begin with, we always start with defining our cover crop goals for each specific field. Usually this is done during the dead of winter, and I sit down trying to plan out the crop rotation. And granted, I've been hashing it out like a couple seasons before, but it's always nice to just look at what was growing there the previous season and how bad the weed pressure was, if it was really sandy, kind of weak soil, if there were any diseases that we needed to break up. We're dealing with ground that was growing potatoes for years, and so common scab is a serious issue for us, and our beets scab up if we're not careful with which field we plant them in. And so we've been consistently using crop rotation to try to deal with that, and paying specific attention to specific like legumes. And then we have been playing around on some newer acreage with nitrogen fixation with cash crops or for cash crops. And then on the perennial ground, we're playing with forage and harvesting it for mulch, which I think it's kind of cool to hear of more farmers doing that. Makes me feel a little less crazy. So that's nice. And then I see cover crops as just this wonderful window into reducing tillage on our farm. And it's something that I'm really interested in exploring further as we move forward into the life of Goranson Farm. So some of the essential equipment that we're dealing with, we're doing all of our primary tillage with a Farmette softer. We were using just a disc harrow and Perfecta. This is a far superior tool to both of those. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the cutout discs, which actually do the tilling, are fixed to the toolbar, excuse me, on torsion axles. And so they flex independently, so you don't get any plugging. And this is actually Jason on the tractor here. And you can knock down winter rye, standing winter rye with it. And it has this action that just fluffs a little bit of soil on top of that material, starts the decomposition process, and gives just enough soil for us to come in with our international 510 grain drill and get satisfactory establishment. On the really rugged fields, we've actually started to go over it with the grain drill and then make another pass with the softer. One of the really unique things about it is you can get pretty precise depth control if you're in firmer soils by adjusting the double rollers in the back of this piece of tillage equipment. And so we can control the depth and to a consistent like 3 inches. So it really helps reduce tillage within the soil profile, excuse me. We haven't had much time for interseeding in the past couple of years with droughts and school, but we still keep this Ontario grain drill around, which is what we were doing all of our cover crop seeding prior to the purchase of the 510. And those large wheels allow you to get over some pretty tall cover crops. And we've had great success interseeding corn and then the strawberries. So this is a really simple practice, and we really love it on the farm. We have run into some challenges, but we try to cover all of the bare ground that we've got. And the strawberries were just, I don't know, screaming out to me like there's bare ground to be covered there, especially because we're on 6-foot centers and not on a traditional 5. And so those berry plants are spread way far apart. And then I was also interested in supplying that like little bit of nitrogen that they need in the very beginning of the season to get going with some peas, like a winter killed cover crop. And so this is down at the bottom. You can see the mix that we're currently planting, and we throw some other stuff just for fun, like the sunflowers. I've really gotten into barley. I feel like it has superior drought tolerance to oats, and then also crimson clover as well. And we seed heavy, like 120 pounds per acre is pretty dense, but we feel we need it to get the weed suppression that we're looking for. And we are looking to get this in around on the tail end of things, like the first week of September is ideal. So we're probably not getting a ton of end fixation, but there were some complaints when I seeded it earlier that it was competing with the strawberries. So we've tried to adjust the mix a little bit and adjust the timing as well. Weed pressure is a challenge that we're dealing with this season with just the long warm fall that we've had. The weeds have just gone crazy, and so we've had to make passes that we never had to have before to try to control and knock back some chickweed and even galansoga. Like we got our first real frost last week. So yeah, it's definitely been a challenge, and we didn't end up actually cover cropping it this year because we're battling those weeds in the wetter sections. And it's also just, I'm always prioritizing. I'm sure we're all farmers, we understand this, but I'm looking at the amount of area that I can cover per hour, and it's a treat when I get to drive a tractor or horses along these rows and fill in this ground. So we started playing around with cover crop mixes 2016, I guess, around then, 2015, 2016. And the primary motivation for that was trying to offset all of this money that we were shelling out to buy and compost And we just wanted to try to grow it. And it's really labor intensive to spread. It's fuel intensive to spread. It costs a lot per yard. So we were trying to wean ourselves from the compost train. And I did a bunch of digging, and it's amazing the amount that cover crop mixes have grown in popularity in the past few years is just amazing. And it's really, it gets you excited. It really does. Because it's not just one or two species. It's very dynamic, and there are so many ways to play with it. Sometimes it actually distracts you from your cash crops in maybe a not so productive way. But one of the primary resources was managing cover crops profitably. I think it's really the best bathroom literature that I've found. And it's still there. And then another article that I found specifically helpful with determining these mixes was making the most of mixtures and considerations for winter cover crops in temperate climates. This is probably older, and Jason can fill us in if there's anything better that's been published in the past few years. But when I was starting out, this is pretty much it. And also Jason Lilly and Mitch Hunter, I don't know if Mitch is with PSU anymore, but they were instrumental in trying to craft these mixes and get me set up. There are also there's everything on YouTube now. So e-extension is super exciting to check out. Since I was just out of college, I was really excited about I don't know, playing with numbers and spreadsheets. And so the opportunity to build a spreadsheet with equations and where I was doing math was really enticing. I'm terrible at math, but I can manipulate Excel pretty well. And so I was able to, just with what I knew ecologically, try to break things up into different functional groups. And I figured out that if I looked at things in terms of percentage in the cocktail out of their recommended monoculture rate, it would allow me to compare across species and kind of simplify the decisions that I had to make moving into this kind of really foreign territory. This is from 2016, so I don't use this mix anymore, but we've kind of gotten, I've gotten a little less scientific over the years, I guess.
But
can I
jump in and point something out on that spreadsheet that jumped out to me?
Yeah.
It's
Totally.
super interesting. So a lot of times when people are calculating these mixes, though, if you look in the columns as cocktail pounds per acre and mono pounds per acre times 100, so you're getting to a percentage.
Mm-hmm.
And one reason that the cost of these can be so high is that you end up going way over 100% of the seeding rate that you usually go at as a total.
Yeah, and you can see that this seeding rate is around 169%, 170%, right?
Right.
And so what you can do really easily, as long as you've got all your ratios, when you're calibrating your grain drill, this is just an estimate. And so you can kind of field tune it. What we like to do is go out and plant a small section. I wouldn't go and plant 20 acres with this mix without trialing it and seeing how it germinated. And so we actually toned it back successively over the course of maybe 3 or 4 plantings. It was a massive field. It was probably over 30 acres. And that's big for us. And so it really allowed us to be oh, this looks right. And this is getting us the weed suppression that we need. And then this is wasting seed. So I think you're totally right. I did have a ton of seed left over, which I planted out in successive years, but it's definitely a risk. Does that kind of address it?
Yeah, definitely. That was great.
And so this is just a photo of looking down into that mix. And my dog's here and he wants me to throw the ball. And you can kind of make out I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but this is the dwarf Essex rape. There's some cowpeas right here in the understory. Those were actually the first to emerge, but I've tried to hold out, trying to simplify my slides. This is a big, this is probably some sorghum Sudan grass. There's buckwheat obviously in this mix. Yeah, but it was super fun and definitely got me excited. And so we've kind of I've moved away from those like very specific pre-mixed concoctions, cocktails, and I'm allowing myself to get a little bit more creative for two reasons. There's some amazing people or farmers producing some really high quality grains and cover crop seed here in Maine, and there's no reason to have it shipped from the Midwest anymore. Not at all. We don't have the time to produce it on farm, and the folks up at Rusted Rooster, Misty Brook Farm, Benedicta Grain Company can do a much better job than I ever could. So we're trying to source all of our seed and mix it all here on the farm, and we're just mixing it right in the grain bin, but we try to layer it. And I don't have any specific mixes because it's constantly changing on like weather predictions. Like if I see like us having an extended period of some dry weather, I'll dry hot weather in late May, even June, I'll switch right out of my oats and peas, throw a bunch of sorghum Sudan grass in there. We're actually using Piper Sudan grass now, and Japanese millet, which is a little bit more tolerant of the cold, I've found. And depending on the weed pressure, say we need to get some successive tillage events in there, then we'll throw some buckwheat along with that Japanese millet. And I have a good enough feel, and by going out and planting a small amount of acreage, I can kind of dial it in over the course of the season. And so I rarely vacuum out the seed box now. I just throw seed on top of it. And then we also kind of play around with our winter annual mix. I should have had a slide in here about our summer, but I feel like I might run over on time. But yeah, nothing too exciting. Winter rye is still the base. It's still the queen. And yeah, we love it, and we plant it really late. I went out and seeded my last little bit a couple days ago, and then it got really rained in. But you can see other things that we're playing with in terms of legumes and other grasses and that kind of stuff. So really what we've learned over the past 5 years is to like just take a step back, really look at our objectives, look at issues that we've got. Like you can look down, this is another one of those like into the cover crop photos. But there are a ton of weeds down there. And so I obviously didn't have the right mix to suppress those lower understory weeds. Like there wasn't enough annual rye in there potentially. Maybe I didn't get the timing quite right. But really looking at your objectives and trying to pay attention to your fields and look at what the cover crops are telling you and your crops are telling you. Often too dense is better than not enough. It's always a shame to see like a stand that's just has enough spacing for weeds to just flourish. And I would much rather prefer to have cover crops struggling with each other and maybe spend a few more bucks than have to go through till it and then seed it again. Trial, I kind of got into this with Jason's question, but trial to tune your seeding rate. And one thing that we've been playing around with that I actually learned from my dad is consider fertilization of your cover crops on those weaker fields. If you want to like jumpstart it for your cash crop, we have on our grain drill, we've got a separate compartment for fertilizer. And so I can fill that up, go out, and even like 20 pounds of N per acre can perk up a cover crop substantially, especially if it's like a summer heavy feeder. And photos all the time. It's really easy if you carry a cell phone around, so I highly recommend that as well. But I actually reached out to Jason the other day because I recently drove over my phone and I lost a bunch of photos that I was really excited to use. And I send, and every time I've got a really good cover crop photo, I'll send him one. But I guess he did something to his phone too, so he couldn't come through for me.
I closed it in the hood of my truck. So.
Nice. Yeah. Bummer. Yeah, my phone didn't survive getting driven over by a by a multi, I don't know how many ton tractor it is, but the 826.
Oh yeah.
My dad's here, he's listening in. And so yeah, so onto frost-seeded clover. This is something that we've been experimenting with for maybe about 4 or 5 years now, and we love it. It works really well with our system. So in year 1 of following following a late harvested crop, say maybe really late harvested potatoes, say you're falling behind or something, or carrots or parsnips or cabbage, we'll go in, till lightly, just enough to whack back the weeds, and then go in and drill rye. And we usually drill it really heavy. The later you're seeding, the more you need to seed, and you can just crank it right up. And I don't know, we've seeded as late as November 4th, and had a good enough stand to really kick down on some of that wind erosion that can happen in a big open area like our farm. And it actually provides, for some reason I'm not, okay, there we go. It actually provides enough cover to hold this frost-seeded clover in. So we'll go in March, and I'll walk out there with really high boots and a little spin spreader, and I'll be out there spinning on a mix of clovers. We're starting to experiment more with alfalfa. Everyone tells me don't try to frost seed alfalfa. We did a little bit this past year. We like it. Yellow blossom sweet clover is another one that we're playing around with. We don't like to spin spread on snow or prior to hard rain. We found that actually can kind of move and concentrate the seeds. So say you spin onto your snow, the snow melts, and depending on how it melts, if you've got a rain event, it will wash those seeds and kind of move them around a bit. And we like it when it's just a little bit muddy. When you kind of have to slog through it, it's perfect. And then so moving out of that early spring and into late spring and summer, the rye will start to head out, and we'll clip it then. And after clipping it, the clover will just go crazy. And we'll clip back that clover maybe 2 to 3 times, depending on the weed pressure. We'd like to use a disc mower, don't have one yet. I don't know if it's even popped up in our equipment wish list. It's pretty low on the bottom, but the flail mower does a good job. And so late spring of the following year, we'll wait until that clover gets to full bloom. And then we found, and I don't know if this has been other folks' experience, but after you let it reach full bloom, you can mow it and then go in and till it, and it terminates incredibly easily compared to some of the other stuff that we've dealt with, like sorghum grass or something like that. And then we'll go in with a fall cover crop to try to soak up a lot of that nitrogen and cycle that over into a cash crop the following year. And one thing that I really want to try to do in the future is go in with a fall cash crop into that clover rich soil. So even though the rye is seeded late, it provides some winter cover and erosion control, and that to us is worth it. And then that late planted winter rye is a fantastic nurse crop. It is usually a little stunted, actually, but I think the allelopathic effect can suppress the weeds enough to get that clover going. And the more light that's able to penetrate that canopy, I feel like you can get a more robust clover crop a little bit, but I'm not sure. It's usually pretty stunted, so I don't have another trial to compare it to. We love how this reduces our tillage and total tractor hours. So I think in a normal system, we would have been tilling it, planting it, tilling it, and planting it, tilling it, and planting it. And now we're just able to mow, and that's a whole lot less expensive. And time, it's more about time, really. It takes a whole lot less time than planting, tilling and planting. So we do have a large land base, and I think that is the key to practicing these extended cover crop rotations. And then we want to get into harvesting this for feed and mulch and potentially fertilizer. Try to make some baleage or something out of it. Sadly, the dairy farms just don't exist in this area anymore, and I think the folks in Vermont are really lucky to have that infrastructure still exist. And the limitation that we've kind of found here is that if it's slated to, we can only use this field if it's slated to be out of production the following year. That's it. That's what I've got. And but I just wanted to say thank you to my dad Rob, and my mom Jan, and my brother Goran, and my girlfriend Lauren Bruns, all of whom support me so much in this endeavor. And then also my friends and partners in cover crop crime, like Jason and Lily, of course, Kelsey Kobeck, who took all of the good photos that you saw. And then also Peter Abello of NRCS has just been incredibly helpful. And I always look forward to our mid-November or early November cover crop walk. There is some amazing funding through NRCS if you don't take advantage of it already, that you should pursue if you're growing any cover crops. And Peter's just amazing to work with. So, and then of course, Mafka, thanks for bringing us all together and providing this event. This year I got just so addicted to fishing and going out on the water and multiple times a week just made me stop and realize how essential it is that we do the cover cropping that we do, and that we are good stewards of this earth and the soils and the water. So I think about it every single pass I take, and every single failure too. So it's really lucky, and I consider myself very lucky. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. Carl also just didn't mention that he's an aspiring striped bass fishing guide. But yeah, so thanks a bunch. That was really interesting. Does anybody have any questions for Carl? Sure, everybody's just saving it all up for the end here. So as I mentioned before, anybody can go into the chat box if you have questions you want to shoot directly to Carl, and send him private messages that way. So, okay, you want to stop your screen share there?
Yeah, kick me out.
Will do. All right. Perfect. Okay, next we've got Spencer Blackwell from Elmer Farm in Vermont that's going to tell us some about his cover cropping systems.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to try to get this thing set up so you can see it here.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. I am in Middlebury, Vermont, and I have a much smaller farm, a 10-acre. We grow about 10 acres of vegetables. We grow, a whole gamut of crops, pretty much everything that can be grown in Vermont. for a diversified CSA that comes and picks up at the farm, and a local wholesale market. So we don't sell to any distributors. I think we're all right in town, more or less. And my partner and I started the farm in 2008, and we live on the farm with our kids. We have a crew of about 4 people. I'm pretty much the main farmer. We don't have any year-round staff at this point. The cover cropping is really what keeps me going. I find that it's just, I have these moments where something where crop comes out with absolutely no effort. You know, we'll weed it. We basically just plant it and walk away until it's time to harvest it. Not every crop, but that's happened enough that it's kind of like the quest for the Holy Grail. It's like, how are we going to get all the crops to be in that place? And the cover crops are really the key that I see to doing that. Let's see, move along. So I saw a presentation a number of years back. I've been covering cropping for a long time. I've been growing on this land since 2008. I've been farming vegetables since 1995. And I saw a presentation. I've been familiar with cover cropping. I've grown cover crop seeds. I used to have a combine. I used to produce cover crop seeds. But anyways, I saw this presentation in 2016, I think, by Ray Archuleta, who's a former NRCS person who's become like an inspirational cover crop speaker. I'm sure many of you have heard of it, but you know, he was basically kind of it was a talk that was aimed at the dairy farmers in the area, and he was basically shaming them all into cover cropping. He's told them all, you're going to lose your farms if you don't start cover cropping and go to no-till. And you know, I was like, haha, I already know everything about cover cropping. And then I see my conventional dairy farmers actually kind of start to do what he's doing, and they're going no-till, which in conventional dairy means a lot of herbicide. And then I'm seeing myself just like with these barren landscapes, even if I'm cover cropping them, if I'm putting winter rye down in October, it's a barren landscape all winter long. Seeing my soil run around, like, wow, maybe organic isn't just like superior. Maybe I need to work a little harder. And so I got more into cover cropping, and also been really inspired to develop organic no-till system, because it really seems like that's where we're getting more of the benefits of the cover crops if we're allowing them to be a little tighter integrated into the cash crop we're after, instead of just like something to fill the space in between. Anyways, armor the soil against the whatever that says there. That is Ray Archuleta's words, and that's a good start. It's like we're covering that up. We're keeping the sun, the wind, and the rain from just destroying this skin of the earth, which is our soil. We put clothes on to, our bodies, and the cover crops are clothes for the soil. Building the habitat, smothering weeds, increasing the fertility. And the new thing for me this year is really, we're setting the stage for the next crop. The cover crop is an actual tool in the production of that seed bed for the next crop. Some of the, let's see here, I can read my slides. One thing I've been working on is that transition. So sometimes I just don't feel like there's really much of a point in growing a cover crop if I'm going to have to like plow the ground and leave it bare for 30 days just to get the cover crop like kill the weeds that were there before to get a cover crop established. So managing that transition to really tighten that amount of time in between photosynthesizing crops, those crops that are feeding carbon into our soil and feeding those soil organisms that are building that space that is going to allow for the water infiltration and root growth that's going to give us those crops that are painless to produce. And so the picture there is just of some, rather than till it all, I just thought we'll drill right into this leftover ground and just tolerate some of the weeds that are there. So most of the weeds are dandelions and stuff, which I never had a real big problem with until this year when they took over, but we'll get back to that. And another strategy is like, this is just the rye, just a couple of pictures I took the other day of some late seeded rye, just like Carl was talking about. It doesn't produce much. I mean, it is better than nothing. It is holding some space there, keeping soil in place better than nothing would, but it wasn't quite good enough for me. And so I've started spreading mulch on it to fill in that space in between if I can't get anything else planted or to grow in there, because it's a late seeding. And like Carl said too, this year I thought I was new with this year. I stopped vacuuming out my drill too. It's like, what's the point? All these things kind of do a little better grown together. So I had some tillage radish left in that drill. I'm guessing it's about 5 pounds to the acre's worth. So I mixed with rye, and they just stay there. And they kind of, all the cover crop seeds, they kind of diminish over time as I move away. Like there's no more buckwheat in the drill because I've seeded enough oats and rye and stuff that the buckwheat's all gone out. But yeah, occasionally it is important to vacuum out the drill if you are trying to, if you want something to say winter kill, you don't want to have any winter hardy seeds in there. So this is a tool I've been using instead of for spring tillage. There's some oats there, and so I'm really focusing on not disrupting that soil at all, especially in the spring. We have heavy soil. I don't know if you can tell from that picture, but it's clay there. About half the farm is a pretty heavy clay, and the other half is more sandy soil. But this is some of the clayier stuff, and it's fabulous soil. It grows stuff like crazy, except for it just does not tolerate being beat up. It just, all those, you can see all those pore spaces in that clay are great. There's all kinds of things crawling around through there. There's roots going through there, and the crop I'm putting in is going to jump right into those pore spaces if I don't pulverize it and make it easy for my fingers to put that crop in. The transplanting is really the only reason I have this subsoiler going through there, and it's only at like maybe 4 or 5 inches deep, just to make a little lighter work on the fingers as we're transplanting. And the other benefit is that a lot of the weed seeds that are in there, they're on the surface, they've either already germinated or they are they've been eaten by critters. I don't know. They don't come up as much if you don't fill it. There's not as many weeds to deal with. The fertilizer, you can see just a little bit. It was a soybean meal I applied to that field, and you can see there's like some golden strips underneath the subsoiler. That is the fertilizer that's laying on the surface. That can be it's a little bit of an unknown to me as to how quick that fertilizer is going to be effective. I'm assuming it's going to give me everything at some point. I don't know if it would be giving it to me a bit faster if I tilled it in. I do lay a lot of mulch on top, which kind of keeps it out of the sunlight and perhaps provides a little bit more shelter for those soil organisms to come up and start eating it and drawing it down in. I keep worms just as a pet project, just a little, cubic yard of worm bin. And they've been really kind of instructive, just to watching how they act within their worm bin, what they like, like the temperatures, different temperatures in the bin, they will move around into different places to seek the environment they like. And so it's been instructive into like providing the growing space, because I'm assuming where the worms are where the nutrients are going to be most mobile. I kind of trying to emulate that a little bit. And with the worm bin, you really just kind of continually layering on top. And that's the idea of my kind of fertility plan. It's just to continually layer on top. And so
Spencer,
part
can
of
I
that
jump in
setting
there
is-
real quick?
Yeah.
I just had a question about that implement. Is that just a subsoiler shank, or are there any coulters around there? Anything
There's
like that?
no coulters, and you can see the ground is all kind of, it's not like a nice straight slot. It's kind of popped up and chunked out a little bit, which is not ideal. And I am I am a make do kind of guy. So, and I always like, right now is the time I should be buying my strip tiller, but right now I don't have any crops to plant. So why would I do that? I don't need the strip tiller until I'm planting the crop. And so maybe one of these days we'll get there. Yeah, just the subsoiler. I took all the shoes off of it, so it's against every good mechanic's good judgment. I'm using the bare shank with no shoe there, just to minimize the amount of disturbance. It's really just cutting like a 1-inch slot, but popping out some chunks as it goes. Somewhere along the line, I have a tool that I'll show you that puts those chunks into a better position. So setting the stage for that crop is it starts before the cover crop's planted on my farm now. The goal is with everything that we're not going to till it after the cover crop is planted, with the exception of that little strip we're cutting, or various other minimal ways to till it. And it doesn't always work out. Sometimes, we're just like, things didn't go right and we're in a pinch and the cover crop didn't cooperate or whatever, and we have to till. We're not 100% no-till. And I think like a lot of those labels, I really hate the term no-till, because I want to not till, but I don't want to feel guilty every time I do it. Or I don't want to feel like I'm a failure, because I want to be a no-till, but I can't not no-till or whatever. Anyways, the goal is to build those beds before any cover crop is built. And ideally, you don't have to redo them after your cash crop. You just put the cover crop on top of your cash crop. And I have beds that I've had since 2017, I'm still growing in, that haven't been changed. The wheel tracks have stayed the same since then. But not very many. A lot of them, uncontrollable, curly dock, all kinds of horrible things come up and force me to till it. And a lot of it is just my own like intolerance for like uncertainty. I think that's what our biggest obstacle to no-till is, our intolerance for uncertainty. But I just, sometimes I just don't know what's going to happen, and I don't want to get caught in a space where I don't have ground to plant in. And sometimes I'll till half of what I think I need and leave the other half to make do with. And basically what it comes down is you can always put your plant in there and you can get the crop. It's just how many hours are you going to spend maintaining it in order to get your crop off of it. And so here's an example of a failure. It's not entirely failure. I got a really nice crop off of it, but it was a labor cost failure. It wasn't a walk away and come back and harvest kind of crop. But this annual rye, which I thought this was going to be the perfect scenario to get sweet clover established without weeds, because I planted in midsummer, and I got excellent stand of sweet clover going. You can see it I broadcast all that stuff with a spinner. And then I spread a light layer of mulch on top so that it would, just like you see the landscapers seeding the lawns, they always put a little mulch on top and it comes in really nice. And well, sure enough, it works really nice in your field too. I have access, like Carl was saying, to rotten dairy silage, so haylage. So it's fairly simple to spread. I think it's on that field is about 8 yards to the acre, so it's not super heavy. It's a light little layer of mulch, but it gets those seeds to come up even if it's not going to rain right away. But the problem that happened here is that annual rye did not winter kill. And so when I went to plant in it, which is the picture with the chard there, that's the next year. I plant, my plan was to mow the sweet clover, and that will die. The tillage radish and the annual rye were supposed to be dead already.
Which I thought it was.
That's a bummer. I thought it was one after the other. That's
I
very
did too.
misleading.
Oh, we got going, no accents there. Anyways, the winter rye came back with vengeance, and so I did a lot of tarp. I did some solarizing to kill it there. I mowed it to kill it. I spread a whole ton of mulch on top of it to smother it, and I hand weeded the heck out of it. And we got the kale and cabbage and chard and turnips out of that field, and it came out superior quality, nice crop, but it was a lot of work. And I quit. Like once I saw the writing on the wall, I quit planting that field. So I left half of it to winter or to annual rye to regrow, because it all went to seed and is regrowing. And now it's a beautiful mat of winter rye on the other half of that section, which I'm hoping maybe will winter kill this year. If not, I may have to, I'll probably tarp it, because those beds are really nicely shaped right now. And there's no reason to tear everything up just to plant something else, just to kill that winter rye or annual rye. So my plan is to tarp it for a month or so next season, and then it should be dead. I thought of this when I was thinking about doing this presentation, but the analogy of thinking of when I started cover cropping, it's just a burden. It's another thing I had to do. It was like, and I think I hear a lot of growers be like, they say it's too expensive, it's too much work, I don't want to do it. It's like, if you think about it as a tool that's really going to like make something in the future easier, it's like, do it right. Don't half-ass it. I mean, it's kind of like, I think of it as like hooking up the disc harrow, like 3-point or any 3-point implement, and be like, I'm not gonna bother with a top link. Just gonna drag it on the back because I don't want to deal with that top link. It's a pain in the butt. It's like, if you think of it as a tool, that's just ridiculous, And it's the same thing with like, oh, I'm not gonna bother, I'm just gonna toss that on and run over it with a disc and we'll see what happens. It's like, take the time and figure out how to grow a good crop like you would any other crop, and it will pay back. So this is the trial of how to get yellow blossom sweet clover to grow well without weeds. I've had a hard time with that. This is this year's attempt. So I knocked out the annual rye, and I'm just doing the tillage radish, and I still don't know if that's really the way to go. My issue with yellow blossom clover, sweet clover, is it's an amazing nitrogen fixer. It dies super easy the second year. you mow it and it's dead and you can plant right into it. But it lets a lot of weeds in. And so where I've had success with the sweet clover in terms of fertility, give it, good fertility, I've had a lot of problems with not necessarily the crop that's immediately follows it, but the next while there's a lot of weeds come in because it lets a lot go to seed. So this year I'm tried it without the annual rye in it, and we'll hope those tillage radish die. But the tillage radish are so aggressive, and I saw Carl said he put 5 pounds an acre on a tillage radish, or 3 pounds, or something like that. And maybe that's really what I should be doing. I'm just putting too many on. But yeah, this, so you can see the first the photo there of 827. That's about a month after seeding. The sweet clover is really prominent in the mix, and then another whatever we're this right now, and you can't even tell it's there. It's kind of like the radish have totally taken over, and it's alive down in there. There's something eats it this time of year. I don't know what it is, but a lot of little just stalks, no leaves on the sweet clover. So I'm hoping that it will come in strong in the spring. We'll see. Some other crops that we use are, this is just like for killing weeds, more or less, or not so much killing them, but preventing them from getting established. I guess the buckwheat is that short-term midsummer that Becky talked about. And I used to also with that one, I would think, oh, it's not worth it to plant it when I only have like 2 weeks until I need the ground, because it's not going to have enough time to do anything. But actually, I think it is worth planting it. I've been, so if I have winter rye that I've turned under, or if I've killed somehow, at that end of May period where it is best to kill your winter rye, I'll plant the whole block. That a lot of times when we're growing, we'll like have a block and we just plant it kind of sequentially out, and by the first beds will get planted that week that we killed the rye, and then the last beds won't get planted for a month later because we're just putting lettuce every week in each one of 8 beds or something like that, 2 of 8 beds. Anyways, I'll cover that with the whole thing with except for maybe that one bed we're planting in, with buckwheat, just to fill the space. And one thing is we're preventing other weeds from getting established because the buckwheat is so fast. And the other thing is we are sucking sunlight and putting it into the ground when, as opposed, and we're not, doing stale seed bedding, which is, running over it every week with tractor. It's like one less thing to do, which I like less things to do. I've been told it's a phosphorus accumulator, so it will go down there and forage for phosphorus and bring it up and make it more available. And then it's super easy to kill if you don't let it go to seed, which it will go to seed quickly. The medium rig clover is another one. Carl talked about it. We do pretty much the same as he was talking about. Frost seeded into the winter rye, mow it every 40 days. I pretty much mow that right when I see my neighbors mowing, the dairy farmer neighbors, because they are harvesting their highest quality forage on about a 30-day cycle. And I think we're going to get that. My impression is we're getting the most kind of vegetative growth and energy out of that cover crop by keeping it in the vegetative mode as opposed to letting it go to seed. And even though clover seed I'm not particularly concerned about regrowing, the plant is going to become less active after it goes to seed. So yeah, keeping that in that vegetative state by mowing it. Next slide, I have some pictures of the killing of those crops. The buckwheat solarizes super easy. That was one day. I think we had that tarp on there to kill the buckwheat. And you can see it's not very tall buckwheat at all. It's teensy little stuff, but and that was, I wish I didn't have a date for which I seeded that. I bet it was June 1st though. So it's like 2-week-old buckwheat that we're throw a tarp on and kill it. And we're going to plant our lettuce right into there with no tillage. Spread some mulch on it to help just smother out, keep that ground covered, smother, especially with lettuce, keeping the ground cool in this time, midsummer. You're gonna have a little less bolt pressure. Heavy soil is nice for growing lettuce in the summer. Carl mentioned it too, how nicely that red clover plow kills, May 24th. Just a pretty light tillage. And so I'm chisel plowing that block of red clover because I don't have any, I really didn't have any decent bed shape there. Part of the no-till thing for me is like, you have to have the perfect shaped bed. The mower has to be able to cut like the entire bed perfectly across at the same depth. You can't have ruts down the middle of it that's going to leave a strip of plants that are 3 inches tall, because they won't solarize very well. We do a fair amount of solarizing. You got to have that plastic super tight to the ground for the kill to work best. There's the sweet clover. That's the one I was trying to get to come back again. That crop is amazing. After every time I've had a successful stand of that, I've had an absolutely painless, heavy feeding cash crop afterwards. Cabbages, corn, kale, grow phenomenally with very little effort. But it's really hard to get it established without having weeds in it. I've found. Maybe some of you have some good advice for me in that regard, but I'd be excited to hear. What do we have here? So this is a method we've been using to kill like a sod, a more of a hardy mixed species, thing that's been established for a long time. You're not going to mow it and plow it and have it die. There's going to be grasses. There's going to be dock and dandelion and all that stuff that's going to just come right back if you try to do just a light tillage or mulch it or something like that. So we put this tarp on it for 30 days. And the hardest part about the tarps is that they just are a pain in the butt to move. So we've gone to like away from the silage tarps and into these landscape fabrics, which are lighter and ruggeder, so that we can staple them down instead of moving 10 million sandbags on top of that. We'll see. It's definitely, they're more expensive, but they're not like astronomically more expensive. It wasn't so much that I didn't really do a analysis on which was more expensive, but or how much more expensive they were, but it wasn't enough to like raise the red flags. So far I like them better. They work pretty much the same. They do let air and water through, where the plastic, the silage tarps don't. You'll have big puddles of filthy dead worm water on those silage tarps, whereas these ones you can see are nice and clean and dry. You may ask why I would bother tarping that thing and then just planting a rye and radish in it rather than a cash crop. But we're trying to set myself up for the spring there. These are the beds that haven't been tilled since 2017. They're still in decent shape. They were in red clover. I mowed it. I've been mowing it for a number of years now. And slowly the clover starts to die out if you don't do something with it, reseed it or something. So that's where the grasses and all other stuff's coming in. So I'm just trying to get back to a manageable state with those. And so I'm just trying. One is I didn't have enough tarp to do the whole field. So I did half the field and I put a cover crop in it on the 8th of September there. And it grew pretty quickly. It was a great fall for cover crops, so warm and sunny. You can see in the photo, it's lush, full. There's no weeds coming in. It's really kind of smothered out all that. I think, you can see a little bit of the pale yellow dandelions and dock sticking through there. But I think that between the cover crop will have weakened that stuff enough. And the other thing I may do next spring is I'll mow the winter rye when it comes in the vetch, and then I may just flop that tarp right back over it, onto it again when I pull it off the side that it's covering. I'm going to leave that tarp down all winter. And so the side that it's covering now will be ones that we plant into probably a cash crop right away in the spring. This is some mixes, a little bit more like, again, this is kind of the period between I do like the oats, peas, and radish in order to for a winter killed cover crop. And this was the transition where I decided I wasn't going to bother vacuuming out the drill. I just add the winter rye and hairy vetch, and then I spun some clover on. I don't have any small seed boxes on my drill, so that has to get spun on. So I've done this before, a mix, not quite all those things. I did the oats, the radish, the rye, the vetch, and the clover. What did I leave out? I don't know. Maybe I did them all before, the peas. But I didn't give the, I kind of went for a much lower rate on things, thinking there was, and I didn't read any books. I probably should have read some books or checked out somebody's extension people's information, but just wung it. And I did like 40 pounds of oats and 40 pounds of rye, and thinking we're going to add up to that 160 or 200 pounds total. And it was great in the fall. It came in solid and dense, but once all the winter kill stuff died out and all I had in the spring was winter rye, it was really thin. So this time I upped that winter rye up to more kind of the full amount. I can't see it because all your pictures are in front of it. I can't tell you, but so probably 100 pounds there, 110 pounds.
You got 110 pounds of winter rye.
110 pounds, yeah. And yeah, well, this is that now. You can see the oats super vigorous in the fall. As I'm walking through it, I can hardly see any winter rye at all. It gets totally smothered out by oats and radish. The peas also totally smothered out. And the clover is in there. I'm assuming it's gonna take off in the spring. I've never seeded red clover in the mid-season before. I've always frost seeded it. I've heard it can be done. So I'm going to find out. The one thing I have noticed that's really interesting about my land, and you were saying in the last presentation, or Carl was saying how you can use those, or maybe it was Becky, you can see those weak, you can see the weak spots in the field based on, where your cover crop is yellow. It's a good indicator as where you need to add fertilizer. I've noticed that I get different, in these mixes, you get different species will dominate depending on your fertility of the field. So if you have like a super fertile section, you're going to get your oats are going to take off. Whereas if you have a less fertile, your peas will take off. I think that's pretty much what I've seen. Anyways, so there's a really, it was really interesting and maybe worthy of some study. Just some things I've noticed though, is that it's pretty remarkably different. The same mix spread on fields just like a couple of 100 yards apart from each other with different fertilization history. You'll get different species predominating. Anyways, next slide here. So winter-killed oats, peas, and radish is a staple for us. We do, I plan out everything, pretty much everything that's going to get planted before May 15th. I make sure that I have enough acreage in oats, peas, and radish to fill out all those early plantings, because they allow us to plant in the spring without tilling. And part of what helps that is mowing in the fall. So I like to chop up that stuff in the fall. I'm going to jump ahead here. This is what I'm talking about now more than the last slide. I'll go back to the last slide. This is the same thing for a spring tillage. So you can see, we've chopped up that crop in the fall, and that's a lush, beautiful crop. You've got dark green oats. That field has got some fertility in it, and it's good to go. When we made the beds, they're all nicely shaped, and so the next spring, if you mow it, you get a much, that oats and peas and radish are going to break down much more underneath the snow and get chewed up by soil life. The snow melts, and you get much less debris on the surface than you do if you leave it standing. The counter to that is you get much less soil protection early in the spring. But if you need to get in there, I feel like it's better to have a little less soil protection than it is to have to till that soil. And so there we are, just ripping some transplanting strips. And I think I have one more, yes, of them getting mulched and then transplanted. And so we took our seats off our water wheel transplanter because we're too slow for the tractor. We can't keep up because that's some rough ground to transplant in. I would really like to improve that situation, but that is a drawback to where we're at with no tilling in April and May into heavy clay. But the crop that comes out of it is not touched again until we harvest it. Those lettuces with the mulch on there are not needed. They do not need any attention. And the really nice thing about that is a lot of times in April and May, you're doing row cover to keep things alive, and we can cover cabbages, scallions, whatever it is, cover that stuff up for a month if we need to. And sometimes you need to in April with row cover and not have to worry about weeds growing under there. You take that row cover off and it just looks like bigger plants. It's really remarkable. And it's worth it to me to break my fingers open, sticking plants into that junk there.
Spencer,
yeah.
Had a question. Is this the field that you prepped the beds back in 2017 or? No, this is different. This was, these were prepped probably the following August or the preceding August. Yeah. Okay.
I have about 25 different sections. They all have 8 beds in them, and about half of them are in sand and half of them are clay. That's the tool I was telling you about. It's a really nice low impact. It's called a Leschy Bed Shaper, and those little wheels in the back, they don't disturb much, but they chop up some of those clumps that the subsoil throws up. Makes things lay a little smoother, and allows you to push cedar through or you know, mow without mowing the chunks. I'm going to back up 2 slides to this is the same system here. So going from, I guess, right to left, the tall plants with a little bit of white radish flowers on them. That's oats, peas, and radish in the fall, pre-mowed. And that is on, you know, the 10th of October this year. And then we mow them with a flail mower, go back and forth 2 directions on it to suck up, you know, the stuff that gets laid down, sucks it up and chews it back in the other direction to make a nice fine mulch. And this is where we're planting. We're gonna actually plant our onions and garlic. We do an overwintered onion where we cover them with hoops and plastic over the winter, and they mature in June. But we're planting onions right into that mulch, and I've done a little bit of stripped tillage with again an inadequate makeshift tool, and put a lot of mulch on there to kind of keep those oats and radish from really taking off again, because they will, they are. I wish I had taken a picture of them now, because they have definitely grown up substantially, that radish in particular, since we mowed them. And you would be very concerned about your transplants if you didn't know they're going to die over winter. But they did. This is our 2nd year doing it. Last year it's nice. We come in the spring and under there, and all the radishes are dead, and all you have is onions. And so that worked out pretty well. Here is another experiment and dealing with inadequate toolage here. Strip tilling is something I really would like to do, and maybe I will actually buy a tool that's made for this. But if we were able to like just keep that rye back from around the plants well enough to get the plants in there, we wouldn't need to till the whole field. So I've made myself a little strip tiller there with my rototiller, which I don't use very much anymore. And so I took the subsoil through and ripped some slots to plant into. This is standing, 6 foot tall winter rye that we just mowed, again, both directions. This is springtime this year. And then the rototiller was just enough to, to organize that planting area. And it's a little wider than I really would like it to be, but that's all I could really come up with the tool I had. And it turned out to be sufficient. So yeah, then we plant the corn down those strips and some cabbage too. This is that field a little later in the season, second plantings. Some of that rye is coming back that we mowed, and so that's where the solarization comes in really nice on a hot June day. Put that down, for a day. Maybe I had it down over the weekend or something like that. It doesn't take long at all with the plastic. If you got to have a good seal on those edges, so you're not getting cool air blowing underneath, and a nice tight, it's got to be nice and tight to the bed surface to keep those temperatures high enough that you'll kill anything except dandelions that are under there. We found out that dandelions don't really care. Anyways, put more mulch on there, and so yeah, this is we're able to direct seed down those strips. That then mulch. That was the same beds that had the winter rye with the strip. The last slide there. That's those same beds. we're able to run out green beans with a seeder down those strips. And this picture over on the other side there is, I again can't tell, July 15th, probably, something like that. I can't, that's, you know, the last bed, the bed closest to the photographer has not been weeded yet. So you can see what we're facing, and those are dandelions more or less that we were pulling out. Not a big job, really. And again, well worth the effort in setting it all up, because, you know, we have a hard time getting enough labor to weed, and we have a lot of weeds. So it's been a real godsend to have some success with this year in particular.
So Spencer, we've got about 3 minutes left.
Okay.
We did have one question about how you apply that mulch.
Oh, I have a slide at the very end. I can show you. Let me just whip through here. This is that same field after it's been done, and because we had such a late frost, I couldn't harvest that. I couldn't harvest the beans. We were still picking beans until mid-October, so I didn't get the rye down, and there's cabbages there too. So anyways, it was late before we mowed our corn in, and we seeded winter rye right on top of it all with that same 510 grain drill, and then spread some mulch. Here, I'll jump ahead to that mulch spreader for you. There you go. That is the mulch spreader, and that's the mulch. It's just rotten haylage. It's something my neighbors got sick of disposing of, and they asked if I would want some. I said sure, and they've been bringing me, it sounds like I got about 200 yards of it this year. So not to brag or anything. Love it. My crew doesn't love it so much. It's very stinky. When you're kneeling in it to transplant, it's not the most pleasant, but when you're not kneeling all summer to weed it, it becomes more pleasant. I don't know if you want to see so the issue I had with the strip tilled rye was that it sucked way too many nitrogen out of my corn crop, and I did not have the ears that I would have liked. The 2 years previous, I had done basically the same thing. This is before I built my shields for the mulch. But I had undersown that with red clover, and that red clover came right through all that mulch, no problem. But not so much so that the corn didn't get a good jump on it, and the ears were way better. So I don't know if it was getting nitrogen from the clover or if I had just the mulch too. The mulch has got a lot of nitrogen in it probably too. So anyways, thank you all for listening to me, and hopefully